Hey there. You're listening to True Story No Cap. Real stories, no exaggeration, no lies. Just the raw, unfiltered moments life throws our way. Relax, lean back, and let's get started. Mid-March, late afternoon twilight. The sky was overcast with leaden gray clouds, from which snow mixed with rain was drizzling. Underfoot, semi-liquid mud spread, slippery and treacherous for passers-by. Eleanor stepped with particular caution, carefully choosing where to place each foot. Falling and breaking something, that was the last thing she needed right now, on top of all her troubles. She was barely getting out of hospitals as it was. What could she do? Age was making itself felt, and the diagnosis was not encouraging. Having talked, they parted ways. Lydia hurried on with her errands while Eleanor headed for the store. She was out of potatoes and fresh bread wouldn't hurt. She would take just a little of everything. How much does one person need? Before Eleanor, like all her colleagues and friends, was constantly on diets. But now she could allow herself an extra bun or candy, but the pleasure of eating had gone somewhere, and in general, her whole life had changed. Headaches became her constant companions almost immediately after retiring. The farewell party was warm, with the entire staff, at a table in the school cafeteria. Words of gratitude were spoken in Eleanor's honor. Each of her colleagues recalled something good. It was a little awkward, but touchingly emotional. At the time of her departure, Eleanor was only 60. It was scary to part with the staff and leave the school where she had taught history for nearly 40 years. But what could she do? The children were becoming more and more difficult. Finding an approach to them was hard. In short, Eleanor didn't wait to be asked to leave. When she felt things were heading that way, she wrote her resignation herself. The newly minted pensioner took a long time to get used to her new life. At first, she would wake up at 7 in the morning and out of habit get ready for work. Then she would remember that she didn't have to go to school anymore. She would lie down again, but sleep wouldn't return. Then Eleanor would get up by the window and watch the people. Adults were rushing to work, children were hurrying to school, and she felt as if she had fallen out of the stream, found herself somewhere on the sidelines of life. "Don't talk nonsense," her old friend Brenda would reply to her frankness. "Life only begins in retirement. Enjoy your well-deserved rest." It was hard for Brenda to understand Eleanor. After all, Brenda had a husband, grown children, and most importantly, grandchildren, 5-year-old twins Peter and Mary. The parents worked, and the grandparents actively helped with raising them. So Brenda had things to live for, people to care about. How could she understand Eleanor's loneliness? And with her own children, things just didn't work out. No matter how much the woman was treated, what doctors she didn't consult, her husband Arthur, being the chief physician of the local regional clinic, had the opportunity to arrange consultations with any medical luminary. He had connections, but nothing helped. And so it happened. No child. Both Eleanor herself and her husband. How many children there are in the world, unwanted by their own parents. Eleanor had seen plenty of those during her years of working at the school, seemingly a prosperous family, and the child dressed and shod like a doll. But you could still see those who lacked parental care and attention. Eleanor and her husband would have been happy to raise Ethan, to make him happy, to show him the world, to raise a kind, good person, but the stork never came to them. For a long time, Eleanor resigned herself to the thought that she would not become a mother. She didn't give up immediately, she fought to the last, until her health began to fail. It was then, at the first warning signs. Her friend Brenda, who seemed destined to have a full set of descendants by the age of 100, didn't fully appreciate her happiness, as is often the case with happy people. She took the gift from heaven for granted and even complained to Eleanor periodically about her lazy son or her fashion-conscious daughter. And friends with children, if they wanted to, they'd go on a trip. If they wanted to, they'd lie around all day watching TV after a hard work week. No homework, no children's clinics, no endless clubs and sections. And still, Eleanor suffered. She wanted to give her love and affection to a loved one who needed it. And lonely old age was frightening. After all, it would come someday, and there would be no one to even bring her a glass of water. And then came the realization that everyone has their own destiny. Eleanor's was like this. Not the worst, to be honest. She had a loving husband, financial security, a beloved job. It was to her job that the woman gave her heart and soul. At school, there were always children who needed her help. She tried to see the children's problems to support them in difficult situations. Some had no one else to rely on in this life but her, and they were so vulnerable, so defenseless. The stories of her students were still remembered by Eleanor in the smallest details. For example, Connor Davis. Everyone had written him off. The principal himself predicted the boy would end up in prison soon. Teachers refused to teach if he was in the class. Connor was bullied from all sides, and all he needed was a heart-to-heart talk with someone who would understand, who would pity him. Eleanor became that person. Connor had problems at home. His father drank, lashed out at the children, beat his wife. Eleanor understood that Connor Davis would perish in such a family. She used all her connections and arranged for the difficult but very intelligent boy to attend a cadet school. Boarding school, strict discipline, all this yielded results. Now Connor, who was considered a future criminal at school, holds a leadership position in the police, is married, happy, and quite prosperous. And he still doesn't forget to call his beloved teacher, visits her, and thanks her again for the important role she played in his fate. Or Isabel Miller. A quiet, timid girl who couldn't even open her mouth at the blackboard. She studied for weak C's. They were given for quiet, trouble-free behavior. Little Isabel had a degree of cerebral palsy, so the girl stood out among her peers, walked a little awkwardly, her legs periodically cramping. Eleanor felt sorry for Isabel and began to pay attention to her, and somehow they got talking. It turned out Isabel was a person of unusual depth and understanding for her age, a little sage. Isabel entrusted Eleanor with her secret. In secret from everyone, she wrote poetry, but she didn't show it to anyone. She was shy. Eleanor helped Isabel believe in herself and also introduced her to local poets. They appreciated the girl's talent from a professional point of view, took her under their wing and patronage. Now Isabel is the author of several books and the head of a literary club at a local university. She found herself and no longer seems like that quiet and timid girl she once was. Isabel is a real star. There were such happy stories in Eleanor's life, but it wasn't always possible to help a child. Take Catherine, for example. Catherine Smith, a thin, tall girl with long hair the color of ripe rye, a real English beauty, fair skin, bottomless blue eyes, regular, pleasant features. Catherine. This little girl had serious problems at home. Catherine's father either died or ran away many years ago. The girl didn't even remember him. Since then, her mother dreamed of arranging her personal life. She was a young and very striking woman, changing boyfriends like gloves. And not just changing them, she followed them all over the country, and of course dragged the child with her. Catherine came to Eleanor's school in the 8th grade. She never stayed longer than a year and a half, all because of her mother's craving for adventure. Catherine's mother worked as a hairdresser, a profession that made it easy to find a job in any city. Or she could work unofficially, freelance from home, which the woman often did. Catherine had to move to this city because of her mother's new suitor, another stepfather. He was a long-distance truck driver, met Catherine's mother by chance in a bar. Well, and he took her home with him. Eleanor noticed immediately that Catherine was having a hard time. She had an eye for it. She'd seen such children, sensed their trouble. The teacher began to look closer at the girl. Catherine kept to herself. No one bullied her or teased her, but she didn't really socialize with anyone either. She avoided talking to classmates, tried not to participate in school-wide events. The girl stayed at school late. She would sit in the library, read something, do her homework, clearly delaying the moment of returning home. One day, Eleanor stayed late at school. A parent-teacher meeting unexpectedly ran long. When everyone had left, it was already dark. Eleanor noticed a lonely, hunched figure on a bench in the schoolyard. The sensitive woman immediately understood. This person was clearly in trouble. She approached closer, looked carefully. Catherine was sitting on the bench in the school garden. Seeing Eleanor, she was at first flustered, embarrassed. The teacher managed to get her to talk. She understood what the girl wanted to hear and feel. She saw. She needed the involvement and sympathy of an adult, strong person. Catherine spoke little at first. She was shy. But then, little by little, she opened up, told Eleanor about her life. The teacher, who had seen a lot, learned something terrible. The mother couldn't stand her daughter. It turned out she had more than once blamed her for her failures in her personal life, because supposedly it was hard to find a good man with a child. And Catherine's mother's men were varied. There were indifferent ones who didn't notice the girl at all. There were also aggressive, irritable ones. The current stepfather constantly found fault with Catherine. Everything she did, in his opinion, was wrong. He also yelled at her mother, sometimes even raised a hand, especially when he had been drinking. Eleanor found out a terrible thing. Catherine. She didn't want to go home. That's why she constantly stayed late in the library, and when it was warm, she would wander the streets until night or sit somewhere until the very last moment, and only then return to the apartment, because there was nowhere to go. With an aggressive man and an eternally irritated mother, Catherine felt that no one in her family needed her, that she was just in everyone's way, that everyone would be much better off without her. The girl poured out her soul to the teacher, and tears streamed down her cheeks. Eleanor hugged Catherine, said something soothing, and was angry at Catherine's mother. This woman didn't appreciate the gift fate had given her at all. Such a wonderful girl. Beautiful, sensitive, capable. She didn't study very well, it's true. But how could she, when she tried to get home by the time everyone was asleep so as not to bother them? That's what she learned from her mother, how not to provoke rudeness or even punishment. And she became even more attentive to Catherine. A warm, trusting relationship developed between them. Sometimes after school, the girl would go home with the teacher. It was quiet there, peaceful, where she could prepare for lessons. Catherine even improved her grades. Arthur, Eleanor's husband, was shocked. He initiated an inspection by Child Protective Services. He thought maybe at least this authority would hold the irresponsible adults accountable, force them to start caring for the child. But the inspection concluded that the family was quite prosperous. The apartment was renovated, the child had a separate bed, the refrigerator was full of food. Eleanor choked on this lie, on the departure from the very sad reality. But what could it be? Catherine didn't write poetry, couldn't sing, didn't want to dance. Needlework didn't attract her. Eleanor couldn't find what would help Catherine persevere. The girl needed strength to grow into a normal person, to become strong, independent. Catherine transformed from an awkward girl into a pretty young woman. She still didn't have friends among her classmates, but she started socializing with girls and boys from a college located near the school. Eleanor kept a close eye on her student. She feared that life circumstances would force her onto a slippery slope. The woman talked a lot with the girl, told her about the various dangers that lurk for teenagers. In essence, she was doing important work for her mother. "Catherine," she would nod, promising not to do anything foolish, and each time she thanked Eleanor for her involvement. "You do more for me than my mother," Catherine would sometimes say. "Nonsense," Eleanor would object. "Your mother feeds you, clothes you, and you warm my heart." Eleanor saw that Catherine was drawn to her, that the girl listened to her opinion. And yet, she worried about her very much. Anything could happen. Little Catherine was at such a difficult and dangerous age, and the only significant adult in her life was her history teacher. It shouldn't be like that. And then Catherine disappeared. The evening before, she had come to visit Eleanor. The teacher was happy, invited her to the table. The girl had dinner with Eleanor. They talked a lot that evening, laughed. Nothing foreshadowed trouble. And only before leaving, Catherine suddenly handed Eleanor a locket. Inexpensive, but pretty. Costume jewelry, silver-colored. "This is for you." "Thank you very much. What a lovely thing. But there's no holiday." "Just take it anyway." "Thank you, Catherine." Catherine left. And only then did Eleanor realize that the locket opened. Inside was a picture of Catherine. The photo was clearly recent. The girl was smiling cheerfully into the camera and looked like a model. A beauty. Eleanor was happy with the gift. She took it as a sign of attention, of care. A teacher, a sensitive, delicate girl. A grateful teenager is a rarity these days. And yet, this gesture immediately seemed strange and even unsettling to Eleanor. And the next day, Catherine was gone. She didn't show up at school and she wasn't at home. Her mother, as usual, was out late. But this time it was clear that something out of the ordinary had happened. As a minor, Catherine was immediately sought. No joke, a 16-year-old teenager was missing. Flyers were even posted around the city. There were many theories about the girl's fate. Some said she had become the victim of a passing criminal, but Eleanor was sure. Catherine had simply run away. Perhaps not even alone. The girl had known the evening before that she would leave. And this locket with the photo, that was her farewell gift. Eleanor told the investigator about this detail, but he didn't take her words into account, dismissed them. The leading theory at the time was kidnapping. Catherine was never found. Her mother, after about, met a new boyfriend and drove off with him to unknown lands. She, like Eleanor, was sure her daughter was alive. She had just run off somewhere because she didn't want to study, and they forced her at home. She had found a boyfriend and was now enjoying life, youth, and freedom. Eleanor never heard from her student again, although she tried several times to find out her fate. The locket remained as a memento of the girl. It was now kept in her jewelry box. Sometimes Eleanor would take it out, open it, and gaze at Catherine's cheerful, beautiful face. Where was this girl now, who was no longer a girl at all, but a grown woman? How had her life turned out? For some reason it seemed that the escape of such a story could not end well. Eleanor blamed herself. She blamed herself for not stopping Catherine that evening, for not asking her more about her plans. After all, the unexpected gift had made the woman uneasy. But the girl? She had looked quite happy then. Yes, truly happy. It was strange, but comforting. Eleanor thought that perhaps the girl's life had finally improved because a joyful spark shone in her eyes. But look how it all turned out. You can't save everyone, Arthur would comfort his wife. He saw how she tormented herself with guilt. I certainly know. Things like this happen in the hospital. Trouble, it just happens. Even if you did everything you could to prevent it, there's nothing you can do about it. Eleanor understood. Her husband was right, but she still tormented herself with thoughts of Catherine. The worst thing was the uncertainty. She so wanted to believe that everything had turned out well for this girl. But that was self-deception. What good could happen to a runaway teenager unwanted by her parents? Arthur, her beloved husband, best friend, closest person, so smart and serious, so strict and responsible at work, so tender and kind with her, with Eleanor. They had been together since they were 20. They met at an amusement park as students, and they hadn't parted since, until death separated them 7 years ago. Arthur worked in a leadership position, chief physician of the regional hospital. It was a stressful, responsible job. He was loved and respected for his professionalism. Arthur loved his work, and Eleanor understood him in this. She felt the same way about her own profession. And so Arthur died right at his workplace from a sudden heart attack. So many doctors were nearby, and they couldn't save him. Trouble just happens, Arthur had said once. And it happened, trouble. Eleanor fell into apathy. Perhaps only work pulled her out of it then. At school, whether you wanted to or not, you had to keep going. Students and colleagues distracted Eleanor, gradually bringing her back to life. And then retirement. And Eleanor felt completely alone and unwanted. She hadn't imagined this time like this. They would travel. They had the money for it. Eleanor's husband was serious and responsible and had long ago opened a savings account. Money was accumulating there for their happy old age. Only Eleanor's old age turned out not to be so happy. 2 years after retiring passed in a mode of adapting to a new life. No notebooks, no school bells, no answering at the blackboard, no meetings in the principal's office, no New Year's parties and cheerful school holidays. Eleanor thought about getting a Dasha to work the land. Only she realized in time that she wouldn't be able to handle a plot alone. If Arthur were here, that would be different. Instead, the woman created a real conservatory in the living room. Flowers were now not only on the windowsill, they were everywhere. Eleanor's personal home garden. She even had 2 birch trees in tubs. The woman enjoyed caring for the plants. After all, they, like children, needed care, attention, and love. Eleanor stopped to catch her breath. Such walks were difficult for her now. The insidious disease was making itself known. And what would happen next? The doctors had made it clear, miracles don't happen. Eleanor's condition would only worsen. How hard it was at such a moment not to have family and loved ones nearby. Eleanor's head sometimes ached before, so at first she didn't pay attention to the worrying symptoms. Her head would hurt, she'd take a pill, and everything would be fine again. Then dizziness and nausea were added, and the migraines were making themselves felt every day now, so the elderly woman went to the hospital. She was prescribed all the necessary procedures, tests, ultrasound, MRI. The verdict of the attending physician sounded like a bolt from the blue, an inoperable, rapidly progressing tumor. Nothing could be done. The only thing the doctors could do was relieve the pain. "And how much time do I have?" the woman asked, looking the doctor directly in the eyes. Tell me honestly and frankly. I have no one. I need to somehow finish all my affairs myself, you understand? I need to know how much time I have. Well, it's hard to say. It depends on how the disease behaves. I think at least a year. Maximum, well, in your case, no more than 2 years. A year, only 2 summers, 2 New Years, 2 birthdays. At best. Only then did Eleanor realize how much she, it turned out, loved her life. Even this one, childless, lonely. She became scared, truly scared. At first, she even had trouble falling asleep. She kept thinking about the approaching end. And so a year passed. The last months of Eleanor's stay on this earth began to flow. The woman had gotten used to the idea. It no longer frightened her so much. Eleanor knew when things got really bad, she would go to a hospice under the care of doctors. They would take care of her there. She just wanted that moment to come as late as possible, because Eleanor had plants. Who would take care of them in her absence? And in general, lately, the woman had especially valued life. She admired the white clouds, was happy with the warm sun. Even in these gray, leaden clouds that now covered the sky, she saw some special beauty, restrained and cold. Eleanor caught her breath and walked on. Her path led to the store. She had deliberately chosen a supermarket further from home. To get there, she had to walk through the park. The weather, of course, was not conducive to walks, and it was already difficult for Eleanor to move. But without this physical activity, her body might give up sooner. The doctors had recommended daily walks to Eleanor, so she walked. Eleanor chose this time, rush hour. People returning from work were walking past her at a brisk pace. Some still had to run into the store, some to the kindergarten for their child. They all seemed to live in some other time, rushing, bustling. Eleanor, however, could afford to walk at a leisurely pace and admire the surrounding scenery. And yet, once, she too had rushed, run, hurried, just like all these young people. And suddenly, Eleanor's attention was drawn to a hunched figure on a park bench. The sensitive woman immediately understood. This person was clearly in trouble. She approached closer, looked carefully. Sitting on the bench was a very young woman, dark-skinned, black-eyed. Her clothes were old, cheap. In her arms she held a bundle. Babies like that are usually discharged from the maternity hospital. She was rocking the bundle and crying. Yes, crying. Real tears streamed down her cheeks. No one noticed these tears. People hurried past on their way. They didn't even pay attention to the girl on the bench, and even if someone had glanced at her, they wouldn't have seen the tears anyway. The stranger with the baby in her arms was sitting half-turned, with her back to the main path of the park. Perhaps she didn't want to be seen in such a state. Eleanor understood that she absolutely couldn't leave now. The girl looked to be in her early 20s, and a baby in her arms. She couldn't just leave her in trouble. The elderly woman hesitated for a long time before speaking to the stranger. It felt awkward to bother people with questions. What if this girl took her attention the wrong way? But Eleanor saw no other way out. "Hello," the elderly woman said, sitting down next to the girl on the bench. "Forgive my curiosity, but what has happened to you? Can I help you in any way?" The girl turned her tear-stained face towards Eleanor. Surprise was in her burning black eyes. She clearly hadn't expected anyone to show sympathy. "Thank you," the girl replied politely, "but I doubt you can help me with anything. My situation is completely hopeless." "That's not true. There's always a way out. I'm telling you this from the height of my years. It's not true that there's no way out." Eleanor, her interlocutor, smiled warmly. "It happens. I would tell you, but the story is very long and not very pleasant. You're probably in a hurry?" "Well, if there's one thing I have plenty of, it's free time," Eleanor objected. "And I love all sorts of life stories." "What time is it now?" The girl suddenly perked up. "Almost 6. The kindergarten is open until 7, so I have another hour. If you have time, then listen." Karina was born in a Roma camp. She and her mother were treated differently from others, dismissively. Karina was punished in various ways. The girl always got more. As she grew older, she understood what the matter was. Her mother was a stranger here. 70 years ago, a young girl, still almost a child, ran away with her beloved to the camp. Karina's grandmother, her father's mother, adored her granddaughter despite everything. Karina was the only girl among the children of her grandmother's sons, long awaited. Finally, the elderly woman would say, the one to whom I can pass on my gift is born. Grandmother never hurt Karina. They often talked for a long time, walked together through the meadows and steppes where the camp stopped at that time. Grandmother showed her granddaughter medicinal plants, told her about their power, and often held the girl's hand. During this time, Karina felt a warmth transferring from her grandmother to her. The Roma said that this was old Valerie passing on her gift to the girl, little by little, despite the fact that the priceless gift was being received by a stranger. Yes, Karina was called a stranger in the camp, and this was despite the fact that she had lived among these people since birth. It goes without saying that the girl's mother was treated much more coldly. Karina remembered her mother as a silent and indifferent beautiful woman. Her father, having brought her to the camp, quickly grew cold towards his beloved, and the pressure from the people also played a role. He had long since acquired a new wife who bore him 3 sons, one after another. And Karina and her mother lived with grandmother. Valerie loved her granddaughter and spent a lot of time with her, but Karina's mother she kept more like a servant, silent. At least the old woman didn't pity her daughter-in-law. Karina always, as long as she could remember, felt pity for her mother. Even as a small child, she understood something had broken this beautiful, still very young woman. Some external circumstances had turned her into such a weak-willed, indifferent person. Mother. Even her own daughter didn't concern her. She was always in some world of her own, like an enchanted princess. She performed grandmother's errands like a robot, mechanically. She spoke little, only when necessary. And she never, never hugged Karina. And how she wanted to feel her mother's embrace, to see tenderness and love in her eyes, or at least interest. Grandmother didn't love her mother. But this feeling wasn't the main one. Valerie gave her a roof over her head, food, clothes, and grandmother tried to cure her mother, to bring her back to a full life. Karina saw this with her own eyes. Valerie gave the young woman some concoctions, read strange incantations over her. The girl so hoped it would work, but her mother remained the same, cold, detached, indifferent. My strength isn't enough to cope with this, grandmother would sometimes complain. Deep, deep in her soul sits sorrow, longing. No one has ever loved her. That's terrible, you understand. It cripples the soul. That's why your mother couldn't bear it. But I love her, Karina would exclaim. That is what is hopeful. Perhaps not all is lost yet. And also grandmother sees your gift. A little more, and when it fully transfers to Karina, it will blossom with new strength. You will be stronger than me. The old woman smiled, stroking her granddaughter's hair. They, all these Roma who don't accept you now, will fawn over you. They will even beg you to save them or their children from ailments. Many things can be fixed with different skills using herbs and concoctions. Only turn to the gift in truly serious cases. It's not a toy. When you grow up, you'll understand. And then, one day, when Karina was only 11 years old, her mother suddenly fell ill. She was as quiet, emotionless, and absent as always. She lay for a week, and in the morning she didn't get up. She lay quiet, pale, detached, and breathing very heavily. Grandmother became worried, took out her remedies and old books, and sent Karina outside. The girl sat near the wagon, leaning her back against the wall, and prayed to all powers that grandmother would manage to pull her mother through. Only some inner feeling told her it wouldn't work. And so it happened. Karina sat outside for about 3 hours. And then grandmother came out to her. From her sad face, the girl immediately understood everything. Mother was no more. Karina took the loss hard. Yes, her mother had never shown any feelings towards her daughter, but still, even her presence gave Karina strength, and most importantly, hope always lived in the girl's heart. Hope that someday everything would be different. Mother would awaken from her stupor, the spell would break, she would smile at her daughter, hug her, and a completely different life would begin. Happy, bright, warm. Grandmother supported her granddaughter as best she could and tried to understand what the child was feeling now. 2 years passed, and then one morning, Valerie sat Karina down in front of her, having first warned her that they would have a serious talk. I had a dream today, grandmother began. Not a simple dream. I understood that I would soon be gone. No, grandmother, Karina exclaimed. After her mother's death, her most terrible fear was losing her grandmother, because then she would be left completely alone. Her father had completely forgotten about her existence, living with his new family. The other Roma also didn't accept Karina. Only grandmother. Only she in the whole world truly loved Karina. Let grandmother stop saying such terrible words. Karina, you must understand. It has to be this way. It's how things turn out. Give me your hand. I will pass on my gift to you completely. I no longer need it. Karina obediently held out her palm to her grandmother. She squeezed it with her dry, thin hand, and the girl felt the familiar warmth seemingly transferring from her grandmother to her. It was a pleasant feeling, but this time it was frightening. Grandmother was never wrong, and she was surely telling the truth now, too. How will I be without you? I know, dear. You're scared. Grandmother stroked her granddaughter's head. She looked at her with inexpressible sadness. It was clear that grandmother also didn't want to leave the girl without her support. Without her, Karina was very weak and vulnerable. They never accepted you here. Listen carefully. When I'm gone, leave the camp. Otherwise, they will turn you into a servant, wear you out with physical labor. Your gift must serve good people. It was given to you to save people. So as soon as I'm gone, go. At night. It's warm, good. You'll get to the city easily. Any city that happens to be nearby at that moment. Ask people where the shelter, the orphanage is, and go there yourself. Ask as a child, they won't refuse. You'll be among strangers, but at least warm and fed. You'll grow up, get stronger. Karina looked closely at her grandmother, searching for signs of illness, but she looked as usual, cheerful, lively, quick. The girl began to think that grandmother was mistaken, or that the terrible thing that was supposed to happen wouldn't happen soon. But one morning, grandmother didn't get up from her bed as usual. Karina, already knowing what was wrong, slowly approached her loved one and made sure that grandmother was no longer here, but somewhere very, very far away. Only her body remained here. The girl sobbed loudly. She cried for a long time, trembling spasmodically and shrugging her shoulders. But after that, she felt a little better inside. Then Karina sat down right on the floor by her grandmother's bed and thought deeply, Grandmother is gone. I need to leave. And it's best to do it right now, before any adults find out and stop her. Karina understood. They didn't love her here because she was a stranger. Some were even openly hostile to her. People were restrained only by grandmother, who had great authority in the camp. She helped the Roma get rid of toothaches, calmed migraines. Because of this, they tolerated her granddaughter. And now Karina had no protector. It meant it was time to follow grandmother's advice, run from the camp wherever her eyes led her. Karina knew the city was not far. They had driven past a sweet, cozy little town the evening before. Karina admired its lights, the distant towers and tall buildings. Not a metropolis, but not a tiny town either. There was definitely an orphanage there, and not just one. So Karina needed to go there. The girl quickly packed her few belongings into a backpack and, unnoticed by anyone, left the camp. She walked for a long time along a dirt road through wide fields, trudging toward the city. The unknown both frightened and captivated her. Tears streamed down the girl's cheeks from the abundance of emotions. She didn't even wipe them. No one could see anyway. To herself, Karina seemed tiny, insignificant, weak. But the girl knew. Somewhere inside her sat a strong gift. It wouldn't let her perish. It would help her in a difficult situation. Finally, the girl reached the city, asked people for directions to the orphanage, found the institution, opened the door, and asked to be taken to the director. A strict lady in glasses listened to the girl's story attentively. It was a pre-prepared legend, which, however, contained a grain of truth. Karina said she was born and raised in a camp. She didn't specify that she was only half Roma. And then her parents died. The Roma turned the girl into a servant. Another adult widower threatened to marry her. In short, Karina had run away from such a hard life. She had chosen her own path, a different one. She didn't want to live in the camp anymore, but dreamed of studying, getting a profession. It was difficult, but somehow Karina was registered and given the necessary documents. The girl took a long time to get used to her new life. Everything was different here. It was confusing. High beds instead of sleeping mats, clean ironed bedding, different clothes, different food, a strict daily routine, studying. Karina liked to study. She had a lot to catch up on, so the girl devoted herself. At first, even here, Karina was treated as a stranger. Of course, exotic appearance, unusual story, but it wasn't contempt and alienation like in the camp. Karina aroused interest. In the first few months of her stay in the orphanage, she had to tell her story several dozen times. She even became a local celebrity. Then life settled into a routine. Karina finished ninth grade, trained as a merchandiser, celebrated her 18th birthday, and left the orphanage. She received a small apartment from the state as an orphan and got a job. Not in her profession, though. Experience was needed there, and how could a recent college graduate get it? She stood at the checkout in a supermarket. The pay wasn't bad, at least. In short, Karina felt quite happy and, most importantly, normal, not like a second-class person as in the camp, a full-fledged person. She now perceived that past life as some kind of fairy tale. Much of what happened to her back then seemed like fiction, fantasy. For example, that grandmother's gift, which she supposedly passed on to her granddaughter. Time passed, and this superpower didn't manifest itself in any way. So Karina decided that it had all been her imagination. It hadn't happened, that's all. One day, the supermarket where Karina worked was undergoing renovations, and the employees, who couldn't serve customers temporarily, had to take turns monitoring the workers. During one of her shifts, Karina met a handsome young man. Tall, lean, athletic, fair hair, light blue eyes, a beautiful gaze, an open smile. This guy immediately showed interest in the young cashier, winked at her cheerfully. The girl smiled back, showing that she was not at all against getting acquainted. Young men had approached her before. Karina had an interesting and striking appearance and knew it perfectly well, but things never went beyond a couple of dates. These suitors disappointed the girl, but with Andrew, everything turned out completely differently. Somehow, from the first glance, a strong and very warm feeling began to grow between them. Karina understood this immediately. They didn't date for long. After a few dates, they decided to live together in Karina's apartment. Andrew was not from the area. He was born in a village in a large family. Well, and now he worked on a construction site, toiling away. He dreamed of a house, not an apartment. And for now, he lived in rented accommodation. Andrew immediately took on all the male chores around the house. He re-glued the wallpaper, straightened the curtain rod that had been crooked for a long time, repaired the cupboard, and it also turned out that he was an excellent cook. In general, it seemed there was nothing Andrew couldn't do. That was his life. He had to learn everything. They were happy, warm, and cozy together. The young people understood each other with half a word, and sometimes words weren't even needed. At last, Karina felt happy and loved. She hadn't even dreamed of such a relationship. Andrew and Karina got married, and soon after, the young wife realized she was pregnant. The joy of the future parents knew no bounds. They weren't afraid that their responsibilities would soon increase. Everything was great for them. They had a roof over their heads. They didn't complain about their financial situation, as Andrew earned well on his construction site. Their son Theodore, their firstborn, was born. Andrew chose his name. It was his grandfather's name, a kind and hard-working man. A year and a half later, their daughter Catherine was born. Karina named her after her mother. Taking care of the little ones, household chores, all this delighted and truly absorbed Karina. She enjoyed her role as wife and mother. Yes, sometimes it was difficult, but it was all for her loved ones, for her husband, the reliable, caring Andrew, for Teddy and Kathy, so sweet and funny. The little ones started kindergarten, and things got a little easier. Karina started thinking about going back to work, decided to return from her second maternity leave a little earlier. The couple had ambitious plans. They both dreamed of expanding, turning their one-bedroom apartment into a two-bedroom or even a three-bedroom, and only then could they think about a house. More space, and in general, it was already cramped for such a large family in one room. And then Karina realized she was expecting another child. This time, she was scared. They hadn't planned on becoming a large family so soon, and it wasn't the right time at all. Andrew supported her, calmed her down, assured her that everything would be fine. "I'll just work more, that's all. There are plenty of opportunities to pick up extra work on the construction site." The trouble happened when Karina was in her last month before giving birth to her youngest daughter. There was only a little time left. That morning, she didn't want to let her husband go to work. A vague premonition of trouble gnawed at her. Karina chased away the bad thoughts, attributing everything to her condition. After all, she was due soon. And just 2 hours later, Karina received a call informing her of the terrible news. Andrew had been crushed by a concrete block on the construction site. Of course, he couldn't be saved. Karina sobbed, wailed like a wounded animal. Fortunately, the children were in kindergarten, so she could give vent to her feelings. The woman cursed fate, which had once again treated her so cruelly, calling Andrew back. And then somehow, she suddenly felt his presence. It was inexplicable. She just knew that Andrew was here. He saw her, wanted to comfort her, but couldn't, and it hurt him. Karina pulled herself together, said aloud that she loved Andrew very much, realizing that she would never have the chance to be heard by him again, and also that she perfectly understood she now needed to be strong, brave for their children. "You can rest assured about us. I'll manage." And Karina tried. She tried very hard to be strong, although sometimes it was simply unbearable. Due to stress, labor started prematurely. She had to leave the children with neighbors. Where else could she put them? Initially, the plan was for Andrew to take leave while Karina was in the maternity hospital, but fate had twisted everything around. The girl was born small, but strong and viable. Karina named her Isabel. That's what Andrew had wanted. And the young woman was left with 3 small children on her hands, without any support. Karina applied for all possible benefits, but the money still wasn't enough. The children grew quickly, constantly needing new clothes and shoes. And also, they were often sick. She had to spend fabulous sums at pharmacies. But what could she do? Health comes first. This is where her gift would have been useful. If only she could rid her little ones of these endless colds and tonsillitis. But the gift was dormant. Or maybe there was no gift at all. Money was very scarce, and Karina took a step that later seemed like a fatal mistake. She took out a loan. The money, so necessary for the family, was in her hands instantly. Karina bought groceries, medicine, updated the children's wardrobes, but she had to repay the amount with high interest. At first, Karina paid the debt regularly, but then the children got sick again, she had to spend a fortune on treatment, and Karina missed a payment. As a result, she was put on the meter, and the debt began to grow at a frantic pace. It was a common scheme. Karina wasn't the only one caught on this hook. In short, collectors started bothering the young woman. Karina couldn't go back to work. Little Isabel was still too young. She couldn't even leave her for a couple of hours, for example, to clean the stairwell. In short, Karina lost her apartment. It was seized for debts, as the woman had taken out the loan against the property. Karina clutched her head. Where to go with 3 little ones? What had she done? Neighbors advised her to register at a special shelter. She could live there for about 3 months. People were given time to find a job, to settle into life somehow. But what was Karina to do? Who would hire a woman with 3 children on her hands, one of whom was an infant? And how could she work if she couldn't leave Isabel with anyone, and the older ones were constantly getting sick and couldn't attend kindergarten? Well, that's my whole story. After a week, of course, I couldn't find a job or an apartment. How could I? I have little Isabel. Where would I put her? And what now? The former teacher gasped. Karina's story was simply incredible, at times even resembling a fairy tale. But this wasn't a movie, this was real life, and the young woman with 3 little ones truly had nowhere to go. How terrible. They'll be taken to a shelter. They'll grow up in state institutions like I did, only with a living mother who is so worthless that she can't provide them with normal living conditions. Having said this, Karina started crying again. Quietly, unnoticed. But Eleanor, of course, saw everything and perfectly understood the desperate situation the young woman was in. "Here's what," the old woman said decisively. "Move in with me." It was a strange, risky offer, inviting an unfamiliar family into her home. Eleanor knew her neighbors and acquaintances would judge her, but she didn't care. Karina and her children needed help. If she didn't extend a hand now, the little ones would go to a shelter and their mother straight to the street. 4 broken lives. Eleanor had nothing. She was living out her days. And Eleanor would do it, even at risk to herself. What did it matter now? Karina couldn't believe her ears at first. "And your relatives? They'll be against it, won't they?" "I have no one." Eleanor placed her hand on Karina's shoulder. "Let's go to the kindergarten for your little ones. Then we'll stop by the store. We need to buy something for dinner. I have guests now." Eleanor grew happier each day about that chance meeting with the young woman in the park. Karina turned out to be a very pleasant and kind person, hardworking, grateful, sensitive, and her children. Eleanor's heart melted with tenderness when she watched them. Serious, thoughtful Theodore, chatty Kathy, plump, bright little Isabel. Eleanor baked them pancakes and pies, feeling like a grandmother. It was such a pleasant feeling, indescribable in words. Eleanor and Karina often had heart-to-heart talks. They both needed this warmth, care, attention, the absence of a feeling of total loneliness and uselessness. Complete strangers in just a few weeks. So she had to tell Karina about her diagnosis. If only I had that gift, she shook her head bitterly. Time passed. Eleanor's condition worsened. It was inevitable, and the doctors had warned her immediately. This is what happens. It was time to move to the hospice under the care of medics. Karina saw Eleanor off with tears in her eyes, all in a hurry, although the elderly woman tried to dissuade her from this troublesome step. After all, she would have to go back home with tiny little Isabel in her arms. Eleanor had taken care of Karina in advance. She had willed her the apartment. The neighbors, of course, gossiped. She'll kill you just to get the apartment faster, poison you, or come up with something else. But Eleanor was sure of Karina. You couldn't fake that. The elderly woman was a good judge of people. Karina was truly attached to her and was very afraid of losing her. Karina herself had said this many times and even cried. What is this? Why do all my loved ones leave? Why am I always left alone in the end? Karina, upon learning of Eleanor's terrible diagnosis, broke down and sobbed, quite sincerely. Eleanor comforted her, promising that everything would be all right. Karina later apologized to her for her weakness. The hospice was quiet, peaceful, cozy. Kind doctors, high doses of medication relieving pain and attacks. Eleanor spent her time in a semi-conscious state. Her head felt light, her soul calm. Karina visited her often, placed her palm on her forehead, looked intently, directly into her eyes. After her visits, Eleanor felt better, cheerier, somehow regained strength. Probably from the feeling that someone needed her, someone worried about her, cared for her. Several weeks passed. To her surprise, Eleanor felt better. She even had the strength to walk in the hospital garden. Again, she admired the flowers, the bright blue sky, enjoying this farewell gift of fate to the fullest. She might not have another such improvement in her condition. Her test results, strangely enough, also improved. The doctors were surprised, but said that this sometimes happens, a lull before the decisive blow. Eleanor suddenly had a strong desire to visit home one more time, to see Karina and her little ones, to breathe in the familiar scent of her apartment, to take something from there as a memento. The locket, the one Catherine had given her many years ago, a memorable item with a story. It would be good to have it with her here, in the hospice, as a reminder of home, of her past life. Eleanor asked the doctor for permission. He gave his consent for the trip home. Eleanor called a taxi and left. It was so amazing. She hadn't thought she would ever leave the hospice alive. This wasn't a recovery, of course, not a cure for the disease, but not to feel pain, to be able to go wherever her heart desired. She felt strength in her legs and arms, and a pleasant lightness throughout her body. Eleanor opened the door with her key. The apartment was quiet and empty. It was clear. Karina was out with little Isabel. The older children were at kindergarten. Eleanor walked through her familiar rooms, touched her favorite things. The rocking chair, the teddy bear Arthur had won for her at a shooting gallery once. The soft blanket. Here was the bedside table with the drawer where her jewelry lay. Eleanor wasn't interested in expensive chains and rings. She had come for that very locket. The elderly woman found the item she wanted, opened the locket, and admired Catherine's cheerful face. Where is she now? Then she heard a sound. Eleanor hurried to meet it. You're home, Karina gasped. She sat little Isabel down and approached Eleanor. Joy and surprise were in Karina's eyes. Yes, well, I felt better. They let me come home for a little while. Better? Karina smiled. Really? Did it actually work? What worked? Eleanor didn't understand. It's all my gift, you see. I was worried about you. I didn't want to lose another loved one. I've already had so many losses in my life. When the children weren't looking, I even cried. And one day, I had a dream. My grandmother, Valerie the Roma woman, she sternly told me that I had to stop crying, that now was the time to use my gift. Yes, grandmother said it would be difficult, and it cost her a lot of effort, and it would all be in vain if I didn't pull you through. And I did it. I awakened the power within me. I think grandmother helped too. Eleanor blinked in confusion. Well, Albie, is this really true? And then she remembered how easy she felt every time after Karina's visits, how hot her hands were. Not just hot. Eleanor had thought even then that she was just imagining it because of her illness. What did the doctors say? Karina still didn't seem to fully believe in this miracle herself. Well, they said the tests improved, but it could just be a lull before the storm. There won't be any storm. Karina smiled broadly and then hugged Eleanor tightly. The storm is canceled. My gift has awakened. It awakened so I could save you, you understand? You don't believe it? You'll see. Everything will be all right. Now Karina clasped her hands together with overflowing emotion. Her coal black eyes shone with joy. Little Isabel didn't understand anything, but she sensed that something good was happening, and she smiled too, just like her mother. Oh, what's that in your hands? Karina finally noticed the locket. What an interesting thing. I feel it has some special energy, warm, good. This is a gift from one of my students. A former one, of course. It was a long time ago. Eleanor still couldn't quite process what Karina had said. Does this mean the imminent end is canceled? She'll live longer? And now she especially wanted to live. And there were the little ones who loved her so much and needed her so much. She wanted to see them grow up, mature. She wanted to support them on their difficult life paths. Life is so difficult. People need help, support, understanding, love. Meanwhile, Karina was turning the locket in her hands. It had somehow really caught her attention. Finally, she pried open the lid with her fingernail. A gasp of surprise was heard. Karina covered her mouth with her hand. It's my mother, the woman finally said, pointing at Catherine's photo. She's younger here, but it's definitely her. I recognized her. It can't be. Eleanor hadn't recovered from one shock when a new one hit. Things like this just don't happen. Apparently they do. It's definitely Mom. Her eyes, her lips, her nose. I remember her face in the smallest detail. What was your mother's name? Catherine. I named my older daughter after her. Of course. How did I not realize sooner? And my student was also named Catherine. She disappeared when she was a teenager. I didn't help her. I didn't understand in time. She ran away to a camp with a Roma man, and then she gave birth to you. Incredible. I couldn't help Catherine, but I helped her daughter. And you in turn, saved me. All this still needed to be processed, but at that very moment Eleanor somehow became completely convinced that the illness had receded and that she now had a life.